Welcome everyone to Crime Writers of Canada's presentation of the Western Wing, Episode 4, Romance in Crime Novels. Uh, I'll start with basically saying that my wife is often the first person who reads my first draft, and she's always saying, "Where's the romance? There should be some romance." Where I counter and say, "Well, it's a crime novel, there doesn't have to be romance." So I have four guests today who are very clearly on my wife's side, who are going to argue that romance definitely does belong in crime novels. The first guest I have is Lyn E, a dear friend of mine and one of the sweetest persons I've ever met before. Yet she's written one of the grisliest crime novels I've ever read. So, although she's published many, many books in the past, her Murder on Belcourt Mountain is the first or her first crime novel, and has taken her from an associate to a professional member of Crime Writers Canada. Would you like to say hi, Lynn?
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a beautiful day.
Our second guest is Joanna VanderVlugt, is a crime novelist at the Jade and Sage Times Mysteries and a host of JCB's um, studios in the dressing room and explores romance in many styles. Styles may not be the right word, but she explores very complicated relationships, including her title character's parents and how they have a very sordid relationship themselves. Debra Purdy Kong has been my writing teacher, and maybe it's the source of my bias when I say that she's one of my favorite authors, but I can admit that her Casey Holland series was one of the reasons why I wanted to become a crime writer myself. So always an honor to introduce um, Debra Purdy Kong. And sorry, John, I skipped you. You can say hi to at the same time.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Erik. That's kind of you to say.
Now, Merrilee Robson is not yet a friend of mine, so I have to actually read the bio that she gave me, unlike everyone else. So, as a servant to two cats, Merrilee Robson uses the time when the cats are sleeping to write mysteries. Fortunately, cats sleep a lot. Her first novel, Murder is Uncooperative, is a traditional mystery set in Vancouver housing co-op. Recent short stories have appeared in the Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, The People's Friend, and other magazine and anthology. She lives in Vancouver with her husband and cats in a house over 110 years old and was first owned by a policeman. Also, she's coming to us today from, oh, I forget, Pender Island or Salt Spring Island.
Salt Spring right
So
now.
even on her vacation, she was happy. She was happy to be our guest today. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about romance in crime novels and its place in it. I think most of us could agree that in a cozy mystery, romance truly does belong there. It would be odd not to have any romance in a cozy mystery. Um, but in something more grisly, um, like a police procedural or a staunch thriller, do you think romance belongs there? And Lynn, I'll start with you because the question is catered for you.
I guess I do because I did it. I I don't know. I think romance belongs everywhere. It's such a part of me, and we're told to write what we know, so that's what I do. I don't know a lot about psycho killers, but I learned a lot when I was writing the book. But to balance all of that grisliness out, I decided I wanted to have some breathing moments for people. So I started writing fuller descriptions of the relationship between one of the lead detectives, Ian McClintock, and his wife, Rosie, who's going into a horrible situation. So, yeah, it's
Oh,
right alongside of grisliness, definitely.
Joanna, you also have various relationships in your stories, but sort of the same question. Do you feel the romance slows the story down, or does it help keep it going?
For me, I find romance also shows character. I can't imagine my heroines or any of the characters in my book without,
I say having some romance, like I'm even if it's bad romance, okay, right? It shows character, and it's or if it's good romance that went bad. I mean, your character is then having to deal with conflict and deal with some stuff, right? So trying to make it, yeah, trying to, for me, it's a tool to show character and try to make it that much more believable. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Deborah, in your Casey Holland series, you follow a sort of the romance through many stages. I was trying to remember. I don't even know if Bud is in the first book. If he is, he's only slightly mentioned, I believe. But obviously it grows and grows and grows. So is that an important thread for your story?
It is, for the reasons also that Joanna stated, is that it shows another aspect of the character's life, and I think mystery readers read a series as much for the characters. They want to see what the character is up to next, and if you make a fully developed character, relationship has to come into it at some point. Very few characters can go through a book after book after book having no relationships, and sure, they can go bad. In fact, it's more entertaining if it does. But for me, I wanted to show this part of Casey's life. The first book is all about family, and she works for a bus company, and she has a lot of good friends at the company who are bus drivers. And as the first book tells us, her ex-husband, who is the backstory, was a driver. And so at 30, she's already been married and divorced. And this new fellow, another driver, who's been her friend for years, is in love with her, and she's not quite ready. So the series progresses with her warming up to the idea that maybe she can try love again. Maybe she really is lovable, because in book one, she didn't think she was marriage material. And Lou convinces her and that maybe there's something there. And so as with each book, their relationship progresses. And in book three, her ex comes back into her life. He's been on medical leave from his job, and he reappears and ends up working with her on an assignment and discovers he has feelings for her still. And this sets Lou off. So the romantic part is sort of an important part of the subplot that is going throughout the story. And then, so by book four, he's proposing to her. And by book five, they're planning their wedding, which doesn't happen because she's brutally attacked. And so the marriage doesn't happen until book six. So, and as somebody said to me one day, are they going to stay married? Should you throw that extra conflict into the mystery and have things go wrong for her? And I haven't figured that one out yet, so I don't know the answer.
Really quickly, I'm going to apologize. I said Bud, and I realized Bud is Kathy Ace's love interest in her series, and I just interviewed you, so I guess I had Kathy Ace in my mind. Lou was the love interest for Casey. Merrilee, your approach is sort of has to be different than the long-term relationship, because you often write short stories. So do short stories have a place for romance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advantage of writing short stories is you get to explore a range of characters and a range of relationships. So in some of my short stories, I think there's romance, and part of it is, I think, if your character is in danger, or a character is experiencing some very stressful situation or an emotional situation, they need to be able to rely on the people that are around them. And there's always an opportunity for that to be either a bonding experience, or for the possibility of the person that they're relying on to actually be a villain. And as Deborah said, to there's a possibility of things going terribly wrong, which can either be a plot point or a humorous break in the tension if you need that. So yeah, I think there's all sorts of ways that you can involve romance. I grew up when I was a kid reading romantic suspense, like with Mary Stuart or Phyllis A. Whitney, which were suspense stories and mystery, but also a strong romance line. And I think that's a really fun thing to do in writing, to experience the relationship with the characters as well as the mystery.
All of you sort of answered my second question was going to be to all of you is why do you add romantic angle to your story? So as opposed to individually asking you that question, I think you've half answered it. I'll open the floor to all of you. Like, why do you think in general you personally thought that romance was an important part of your story, other than just character development? Is there more to it? Is it anything for the reader? Like, does the reader need the romance?
Well,
Whoever wants to talk.
as far as I'm concerned, romance makes the world go round. And even when I read Eat, Pray, Love, and a couple of psychologists were talking to each other in that book, and one was really worried about taking on the task of helping the Cambodian boat people. And apparently, when it got down to it, the people that she was trying to help were talking like, oh, I was in love with this guy, but then my cousin came around and he started doing this and that. And it was all about relationship and romance, not about the horrible genocide and the terrible boat trip over the ocean and all this being displaced and whatnot. But it was about romance and relationship and you know, just because there's violence happening next door in the big parking lot doesn't mean I can't be in my house romancing. It's just, it happens alongside of everyday life. And so that's why I need to include it. I don't really have a choice. To me, I know we talked about this early last year, Erik, and so I decided I'll take all the romance and love and relationships out. And then I read the book end to end, and it was just like, no, I can't do that. Good thing I saved a copy. But yeah, it's everything to me. It's the whole deal.
Any
For
other
me,
thoughts?
they also Lou, as her romantic partner, is also plays an important role as a sidekick in some aspects. In some of the novels more than others. And while Casey is learning to build trust in a loving relationship, she's also using him as her soundboard. And he plays devil's advocate. And she gets really involved in her quest for justice. And sometimes he has to pull her back and go, you know, is this a good idea here? Are you sure you know what you're doing? So he's her sounding board. He's her support system, and also the devil's advocate. So he does play that role. And because they work together and then ultimately live together, it fits well with the main plot where, you know, he is to varying degrees having an active role in the main plot as well. So yeah, so his role is important.
Well, I find, sorry, Merrilee, do you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. I find, like with the third book I'm working on now, I'm sure all of you feel this, where when I was working on book 2, you know, I have my heroine's sister, Sage, and she's talking to my heroine, and then, you know, the reader learns that Sage has a girlfriend. And I remember when I was typing it, I stopped and I thought, keep going, right? And I just kept going. And it's like, and it's not anything I planned, but it just, it happened. And so then now with book 3, that girlfriend is in danger. And it's, for me, it's being neat to show this very strong female Sage all of a sudden be very vulnerable because someone she loves is now in danger and missing. So yeah, and I liked because I liked what you said, Deborah, about sidekick. And then when Lyn, you're mentioning about relationships, I'm thinking, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's part of the what people to talk about the hero's journey, and your main character is always having something that they want. And in my first novel, in Murder is Uncooperative, the main character is a single mom who really just wants a safe place for her family to live. So part of the journey, of course, is to stop the murders that are taking place in her new building, and she's got that goal, but her other goal is also to have a family. And so the romantic love interests play a big role in that book. That there's her ex-husband who may or may not want her back. There's a couple of other guys, one who might be a suspect and one who might help resolve the crime. So it's all part of the mix, and I think it makes it much more appealing to a lot of readers, because we all want to be loved, we all want to have a family, we also don't want to be dead. So as part of the whole exercise, you're trying to save lives, but also maybe have a relationship.
So, as Deborah said, I'm going to play Lou now and be the devil's advocate. I did put down a book like a thriller like Silence of the Lambs to say, well, Clarice should have had a boyfriend. Like, romance was missing. Sherlock Holmes didn't have a girlfriend. Uh, there was one in the past, and she was more of a femme fatale. Miss Marple had a relationship early on, but they never delved into it. So all these classic stories didn't have romance, and I never thought to myself, why didn't they write in romance? So do you think romance just adds to it? Like, should we have Sherlock Holmes had a girlfriend? Would that have added to the story, or does every story add? Like, does romance add to every story, or does it have to be a part of every story? This is what I argue with my wife. Does there have to be romance? My couple is 44 years old. I don't want drama between the two of them.
No, I don't think it has to be. And which makes me think about the importance of knowing your readers, particularly if you've written a few novels. If you're writing, for example, gritty, really hard-boiled mysteries, and you get a handle on the readers, your readership, you're getting some feedback and comments and reviews. There may be readers who don't want it in there, to see it in their mysteries. Just give me the story, give me and forget the romance. And then there are other readers that go, well, where's the romance? So I think you're never going to please everybody. I think you have to incorporate what you feel works best for your story.
Mm-hmm.
And also be mindful of who your readers are. So I think if I couldn't possibly kill the character of Lou off now, I think people would be pretty ticked, because they've invested in the 6 books and they've watched this relationship grow. So there's certain expectation then when another novel comes out that Lou is going to be in that story. So I think once you're writing a series and you're getting into that groove, I think you also be mindful of those 2 things: what works best for that particular story and plot, and who are your readers. And by the time you've written 3 or 4 books, I think there's a certain expectation of your fans about bringing those characters back, who you're going to kill off or who you're going to divorce from and take out of the book. So it's something to think about.
And I think it's character, right? The character of your hero or heroine. I was just chatting about this a bit with some friends of mine, and they had said, and I just thought, damn, I want to use this, where they had said, so what if, right? That what if game, you have a character where, like, the villain is having a successful relationship, romantic life, and your poor hero or heroine is just not connecting with anyone, right? Like there's like flipping it around. So like I can't think of Perot as having a modern relationship, because that's like, who would he date, right?
There's someone for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joanna's right about the character that, Sherlock Holmes romance with Irene Adler. His backstory. It tells you a little bit more about the character, and I think there doesn't always have to be romance in a thriller, but I think there always has to be someone that the character values that might be at risk. So I think, for Holmes, it could be Watson. Poirot has had the occasional little tendresse during the stories, but he also, even though he thinks Captain Hastings is an idiot, he's very important to Poirot's life. So I think that adds to the element of tension, is if there's a character that the protagonist cares about that is going to be at risk. And there's always the trope even in very serious thrillers where a child or a wife is kidnapped and the hero has to go and find someone. So there has to be something that's meaningful to the character that's at risk in the story, I think.
Lyn, would you like to add anything?
I think it's been pretty well covered, but one thing I did think of was the relationship between Armand Gamache and Marie in Louise Penny books. It's not an outright, I can't think of how to put it, but it's such a gentle, long-term, deep, heart-centered relationship that Armand Gamache has with his wife. And then later on in the books, his second in command has another beautiful romance happening. And so she's written a lot of books, and this is a long-running series, and all the way through each and every one there's been romantic threads. So from my point of view, if there's no romance, I likely won't thoroughly enjoy the read. I might read it, but I won't, it won't be really my cup of tea. I might not go back to the second book. But I will read yours, Erik.
Thank you.
Just because I love you.
I guess maybe I doubt it's coincidence, so maybe it's a gender thing. But when I did a call out to BC members saying, "Hey, do you want to talk about romance in crime novels, or just their place for romance in crime novels?" It's pretty clear looking at the panelists. No men said yes. I want to be a part of that. So do you think it is a gender thing? Like, do you think it's a generalization that women want to have romance in their stories and men couldn't care less, or is there more to it?
I'm wondering if it's like, I've just read Sam Weeb's novel, Hell and Gone, and there's a relationship with his hero and a police officer. So I'm wondering whether it's not so much that they don't have like relationships in their books, but whether they want to talk about it, right? I don't know, that's my take. But no, I remember Sam Weeb's book, Hell and Gone, very good book. The detective, it's not a police officer, the detective is in a relationship with a police officer. Yeah, so that's all I have to say. Do they want to talk about it?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know a lot of books. I wish I knew you were going to ask these questions, because I could have queried and quizzed my husband before he left. But certainly the kind of thriller books that seem to be men's books, there's sex. I don't know whether there's so much romance. I guess it depends. I think there is. I think there are sometimes either an unrequited love or somebody that the protagonist is interested in. It might not be as much of a focus of the character in books that are targeted towards men as books that are targeted towards women. But I don't think it's impossible. I think sometimes people like it. Guys seem to, fall in love and get married. So, but Joanna might be right. They maybe don't want to talk about it.
One of my favorite authors is Scott William Carter, and he writes the Garrison Gage series. Garrison Gage is a hard-boiled detective, And although he doesn't look for romance or really relationship, he ends up having them. So, Scott writes them well. Um, they're not graphic sex scenes, they're gentle and lovely. And that's why he's kept me as a fan, because he has that balance.
Mm.
All right. Merrilee, I asked earlier on when I was first talking to you guys if there's any additional questions. You came up with a great one that I didn't tell the rest of the group, so you can answer first. um, but everybody else can chime in second. Basically, you said you'd like to talk about the potential of a romance to go wrong in very bad ways. There's always the love interest as a suspect. So that's, I think, something that crime novels can bring to romance. Like if you're picking up a romance novel, Jack, the love interest, isn't going to turn out to be a serial killer. But there is that possibility every time you read about a romance in a crime novel. So do you think that's an overused trope, or do you think it's a valuable tool in our pocket?
Well, I think it's kind of a fun trope, and brings in a lot of, it can bring in more suspense. If there's some guy that your heroine is interested in, and then she starts seeing clues that he might be the villain, then that's a real push-pull relationship, and can bring in a lot more tension. And there's also, I think, sort of looking over a number of the short stories, the idea. I've written several where people feel that they've been snubbed by somebody, that either a close friend or a romantic relationship, or somebody that thinks that their partner is cheating, and the anger it raises within them is, an opportunity for them to kill someone or to harm them in serious ways. So, I think love and hate are, as people have always said, very close together, and they can bring in all sorts of emotions where people might act in an irrational way if they weren't so passionate about something. So.
I don't think
Anybody else have any opinions?
I don't think I would
Sorry,
ever.
yes.
Sorry, I don't think I would ever go so far as to make Lou a suspect in a crime, but with the series and with these characters, I'm intrigued and interested in peeling back more layers of their personalities as the series progresses. And there are things that Casey might learn about Lou and Lou learn about her throughout the books that makes them go, didn't know that. And it could lead to a point where Casey starts to have trust issues again. Can she trust him to have her back? Can she trust him, in various things? And that came out actually in one of the later books when they're planning their wedding, and they're struggling with the guest list. It's too big. They want to pare it back. And he doesn't, turns out, want his father at their wedding. And she is really taken aback by that. And his parents are divorced. His dad started a new life across the country, has remarried, has a new family. And she's shocked by how vehement he is against having his father show up at his wedding. And it was something about him that she didn't know, because he didn't talk a lot about his feelings about the way his father had left the marriage, etc. So they're still learning things. And that I can see happening, where you look at your partner, she looks at him in a different way and learns something. And hopefully we'll move on and be able to come to terms with it and deal with it. But it will challenge them.
I find with Dealer's Child, it was neat showing the bad relationships. And I'm hoping this is an answer to the question. Okay. It was neat. So yeah, you have the trope, you have the love interest as a possible suspect, and it's interesting because it's like Debra said, intrigue, pulling back layers, trust issues, all those things I'm thinking of with the second book. And one thing I know I enjoyed doing was, you have children and they grow up and they don't think of you as the parent as ever being in love or ever being single or in relationships. So with Dealer's Child, it was fun to show Jade seeing her mom or learning about her mom being in a bad relationship and the parallels, for both of her and her mom, and I think at one point they both say they both admit that they've been in bad relationships. So yeah, I think I can't remember the question now, Eric. I think I went off on a tangent. Okay.
You're staying close to it. Is basically the love interest, potential for love interest to turn out to be bad.
Yeah.
Is it a good trope for us to use or overuse, or
yeah,
should we
I
explore
think
that?
it's a good one. Yep.
Lynn, have you ever considered it?
I asked a question in Murder on Bellcut Mountain. What were the psychotic's feelings towards the last victim that he had in the book there? And I always wondered, was he in love with her? Is that why he didn't kill her right away? And that would have been interesting if she hadn't seen the light so quickly. I could have turned it around at that point, and then she would have been having a relationship with a psycho. And that might have been fun to write too, In both my novels, one of which I only got to 15,000 words, Lurks the Dark One. I intend to go back to that after I write this series. In both the books, the psychos are in love with the heroine. And it seems to be a theme that's calling to me, so it's certainly something that I want to explore in the future. But other than that, a direct answer to your question, I don't have. Comma.
All right. Well, and also, I think you've all addressed it sort of. The villain, either male or female, could be pushed to the violence that they do because of love. So obviously, romance, and we call it bad romance, could turn a story around too. Do you think that's something you'd like to explore? Lynn obviously does, but is that perhaps potentially a future plot point from one of your stories, or maybe not?
Yeah, I've always, as a mystery writer and a mystery reader, and just somebody who spent a lifetime studying human behavior in various ways, I always think that anybody is capable of doing anything under the right circumstance, and so taking that is, what would Casey do to protect Lou if he was in a dire situation, a life and death situation? And, I'd say just about anything, things that she would never envision herself doing. And I haven't, it's not a plot point right now, but it could come to that, Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little harder in a series, but Merrilee, you've got a little bit more freedom in short stories. So, have you ever visited that one before?
Yeah, I mean, in my short stories, I don't usually have continuing characters. I had a few characters that turned up in a couple of short stories, but so I don't think, like, for example, in my novel, if any of the main protagonists would suddenly go off the rails. But I do find in a short story that I find it very interesting to look at what motivates a killer. And sometimes it's, greed or anger, but sometimes it's just one little thing that most people wouldn't find was an insult, but it just hits a trigger and makes the person behave in a way that most people wouldn't and that they would never expect. So I think there's all these triggers that you can do in short stories. I wouldn't say, I mean, I mainly write stories, I think, from the point of view of an amateur sleuth and someone trying to solve a mystery. But I do think I am intrigued quite often when a crime is committed. But why would someone do that when a normal person wouldn't? And I think that makes an intriguing story idea that I've done a couple of times in short stories. And one is a betrayed wife, but one is just someone who always thought that her best friend was patronizing her and just finally snapped. And people do those kind of things. I think it makes an interesting story to look at why they would. So.
It's true. I guess as crime writer novels, we get to imagine the darker side of humanity, see what love going bad can turn out to be, or even love too strong can turn out to be look like. I promised you all a little bit of a reading. I didn't say who was going to go first, so do I have any volunteers? No volunteers? All right, so it's going to be you then, Lyn.
Oh, Deborah had her hand up first.
Well, actually, I was rubbing my nose, but that's okay.
Okie doke.
I can go ahead if you want. So no problem.
Right.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, so I'm going to read. I have to say just quickly that neither Casey or Lou are overly romantic people. And so I don't spend a lot of pages dealing with romance. So what I'm going to read today comes from book 4 in chapter 22. And this is his proposal. And this is about as romantic as these two are going to get or have gotten so far in the series. So he has prepared a lovely dinner for her at home. And she's not too sure what's going on. So here we go. Casey sensed his anticipation. What is it? I was going to bring this up after dinner, but I just realized I can't eat until I get this out. It sounded serious. Lou wouldn't have gone to this much trouble just to dump bad news on her, would he? When he stood and turned the music down, she began to worry. He fiddled with his napkin. I don't know how to do this, he murmured. Oh God, this was bad. Had he decided to make some big momentous change? Had he found another job? You know I've loved you long before we got together, right? He asked. Yes. And you know you mean the world to me. Casey nodded. His news must be really bad. As far as I'm concerned, this arrangement between us is permanent, he said. Me too. She leaned back in her chair. Was he planning to take a job out of the city? You're starting to scare me a little, though. Then I'm handling this badly. Lou took a quick sip of wine, then used his napkin to wipe his brow. Good Lord, he was starting to sweat, not something he did often. It couldn't be the wine, and the room wasn't that warm. There's no one else I'll ever want to be with, he blurted, rubbing his hands together. But you have to understand that part of me likes tradition. I know. Okay, then, good. He hesitated. Then you won't be totally shocked by this. He removed a tiny blue velvet box from under his napkin. I want us to officially be a couple. As her throat went dry, heat swooshed over Casey's face. She focused on the gorgeous little blue box, and when Lou opened it, she gasped. Will you marry me? He whispered, his face bright red and hopeful. Casey gaped at the 3 half-carat diamonds set diagonally in a wide band with a delicate swirl engraved on either side. Oh my God, it's platinum, he said. Non-traditional for a band for a non-traditional woman. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Mesmerized, she watched Lou slip the ring on her finger. She touched the cool, smooth platinum, the diamonds, and grew lightheaded. A perfect fit. How did you know? I snuck the only ring you own out of the jewelry box, he said. So what do you say, aside from, oh my God? Lou's features blurred as her eyes glistened. For real? He kissed her hand. For real. Casey leaned close to him until their foreheads touched. Then yes, absolutely, yes. One kiss led to 3 until Lou's stomach growled loudly. Sorry, I haven't eaten all day. If he hadn't eaten all day, then he must have been really nervous. Were you afraid I'd say no? He nodded. You were so down on marriage after Greg. He stroked her cheek. But things change. People change their needs and wants. They certainly do. She kissed him again. Let's eat before you faint, and then we can enjoy the rest of the evening in bed. And that's where I'll leave it. So, and that is from book 4, The Deep End.
Almost made Casey sound like a bad detective there. Put in, Casey.
Relationships, right? It's her like blind spot here.
All right, it's always hardest to go first, so thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome.
Anybody like to go second? Lynn looks ready.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so this is a short reading from Murder on Bellcut Mountain. It's a scene between two detectives who've met again after 3 years, and they've spent a beautiful day on the beach in Newport, Oregon. Now they're back at his apartment. George took a tentative step toward her and placed his hands on her upper arms. She, with a softly whispered, then backed up half a step. The attraction was powerful. She bowed her head and moved forward, looking up at him through her thick dark lashes. Heat crept up her face. Her heart quickened and her nipples hardened. They were close enough to inhale each other's perfume. Womanly woman, musky man, now completely unaware of their surroundings. They gazed deeply into each other's eyes, assessing, signaling, surrendering. Their lips brushed lightly, tentatively. A low growl escaped him. This is what she'd wanted him to do since the day they'd met again. He is what she said. Was her only response. George cupped his hands on either side of her face. He gently kissed her forehead, the tip of her nose, the outside curve of her lips. She tilted her head back to give him access to her neck. He lightly licked from her collarbone to her earlobe, dragging his tongue. He bent down, then laved the other collarbone, gathering up her scent. She groaned and moved her hands from his hips to his hair. Tangling her fingers through his locks, she pulled him in for a deeper kiss, salty like the sea. He angled his head to accommodate her, and she pressed her hips into his. His erection was evident. Stepping back, Susan pinned him with her arched brows. He didn't move. His eyes questioned if he'd done something wrong. Pardon me. This might be moving a little fast for me, she thought. Do you have a telescope, George? He was panting lightly. Wow, that was a great kiss, Susan. She smiled. Relaxing a bit, he responded, a telescope? Yes, I do. Why? She tilted her head the other way. It's been a lovely, clear day with minimal cloud cover. Comet Borisov may be visible in the sky tonight. Are you game? She asked. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed her purse and headed away from him, her black curly hair bouncing. She snagged her jacket off the hook, stuck her feet in her shoes, and unlocked the door, ready to leave. Susan chuckled. She could tell he had other ideas, and that would have been lovely. But first, she'd ensure that he'd want to follow behind her, marveling at her curvy, womanly form, the same way she was in awe of his beautiful body. That would take time. George complied, then put on his coat and shoes and got the telescope out of the hall closet. Susan was in the hall looking back at him. He had a big grin on his face and was whistling now. Yes, he's everything I want in a romantic partner. How lucky I am to have found him. I'm going to be enjoying these rhythms of love with George for the rest of my life. I just know it. The end.
Now, if anyone was watching, just when you were getting really steamy, your internet cut out and you were quiet. So I'm just saying that was your internet and not me censoring you.
Oh, I didn't think that. I would never think. I know it's Zoom.
The The joys of Zoom, yes. All right, it's hardest to go last, so I have a volunteer for third.
I'll go next.
You got your hands up first, Merrilee.
Okay. Okay. Well, mine isn't nearly as steamy. I'm going with a story called "Tired of Bath." It's my most recent short story, which is out in the latest issue of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and it's a time travel crime caper story. The protagonists are Emma, who is a young teacher who has just arrived in Bath at the invitation of her childhood friend Josh, who is a filmmaker working on a revisionist version of Pride and Prejudice that she actually objects to. And the story, they're not a couple, they don't become a couple, but there's a bit of a hint of that they're not just the friends that they claim to be. So, so starting out, he ran his hand through his straw-colored hair. He'd obviously been doing that for a while as some of the waves were standing on end. When he grinned at me, his blue eyes sparkling, I could see why women kept falling for the guy. Our friendship when we were kids must have left me immune to those charms. But I'd seen that look on Josh's face before. I recognized that excitement. I just hoped it wasn't going to get me into trouble this time. Come on, he said. I told you I had something to show you. I hadn't managed to sleep on the overnight flight. That and the train journey had left me exhausted. But I couldn't help but being thrilled on the short walk to Joss's apartment on Brock Street. I'd been tired and cranky, but I could feel my spirits lift. The city looked exactly as I had pictured it. The sun came out as I stopped to look at the Georgian buildings surrounding the elegant circus, touching the stone with a golden glow. You'll have plenty of time for sightseeing, Josh said impatiently. What I need to show you can't wait. As soon as we got to the apartment, Josh had dumped my bag near the door. He donned a pair of latex gloves, handed a pair to me, and then hurried into another room. He came back carrying a few sheets of paper, holding them flat out in front of him and gently placing them on the table as if they were breakable. I stepped closer to the table. Don't touch them without gloves on, Josh warned. Afraid I'll leave fingerprints? Just don't. The pages were covered with writing in a small, neat hand with a few lines crossed out. At the top of the page, the title at the top of the page was underlined. First Impressions, it said. Josh was eagerly watching my face. Where did you get this? I asked, and what is it? I was hoping you could tell me. Well, First Impressions was the original title of the book that Jane Austen eventually published as Pride and Prejudice. I stopped talking when I saw Josh's delighted grin. I looked down at the sheets again. They were an unusual size and the paper looked thick. For a moment, I felt the same sense of excitement I could see on Josh's face. But Josh, these can't possibly be part of a manuscript that's over 200 years old. And so on.
Okay,
Erik, you're muted.
I was muted. Sorry.
Okay. All right, if I start?
Please do, Joanna.
Okay. Okay. So this scene came about totally unexpected, and it was one of the ones that I just thought, go with it, go with it. Your character is revealing something. Jade is my heroine. Her sister Sage are going to go see this professor who may have information with respect to her father's death. But things don't go exactly as planned. Okay. We walked under a stone archway to a set of glass doors. I pulled open one door, holding it for Sage, and we stepped in. Compared to the grandeur of the estate, this was the blandest office I had ever seen. Cream walls with no pictures, battleship linoleum, wooden desk, and a brown armchair with one saggy cushion. Can I help you? We turned. A blonde assistant with curly hair stood out in the drab surroundings. While she typed on her keyboard, a second monitor aired a National Geographic documentary about penguins and gender identity. Hi, my name is J. Time. I had a visit from Mr. Younghusband a week ago, and the assistant briefly glanced at Sage, then at me. He left me items and I want to talk to him about. He left me items I want to talk to him about. I've tried calling to make an appointment, but all I get is voicemail. The assistant again slid Sage a glance before looking at me. How about you two have a seat? He may have a few moments before his next lecture. Thank you, I said. Thank you, Sage repeated. The assistant stood. She leaned toward Sage. And your name? Sage Time. We're sisters. Nice, she smiled. I like your penguins, Sage said, pointing at the two stuffed penguins positioned by her telephone. She pointed at one. That's Silo, and she pointed at the other. That's Roy. They're chin-strap penguins. Silo is my spirit animal. I looked at my watch. Why your spirit animal? Seriously, Sage. Because Silo has been observed pair bonding with Roy in the Central Park Zoo. Two male penguins flipper-flapping, ignoring the females. I frowned. Mr. Younghusband's assistant's spirit animal was a gay male chinstrap penguin. What was I missing? Even in the animal kingdom, she said in a sweet voice, it's okay to be gay and in love. Sage smiled. Mr. Younghusband, right. Her sea foam suit matched her Kate Spade patent heels that clicked on the linoleum. She knocked on a closed door. A muffled voice called out. She motioned to us one moment and slipped into the office. I looked at Sage. You're hitting on the assistant with poodle hair. I'm not hitting on anyone. She looked at me all innocent. I asked about her penguins. The assistant returned, eyebrows furrowed. She stood in front of Sage. I'm so sorry, she said, pressing the palms of her hands together. Mr. Younghusband is extremely busy and asked. The office door opened and Mr. Younghusband marched out, gripping a briefcase, a textbook, and a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. Mr. Younghusband, I called out, please make an appointment with Jillian, Miss Time. Mr. Young, he was out the door. I wasn't going to be brushed off that easy. I ran after him. Mr. Younghusband, author of 5 thriller novels and plotting the thriller using plain language. He stopped and looked to his left. You read Plotting the Thriller? He slugged back a mouthful of Pepto. I hesitated. Well, actually, no. He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and continued walking, grappling with the textbook and a soft leather briefcase. I need to ask you a few questions. Do you need a hand? I'm fine, thank you. Mr. Younghusband, Sage shouted. Please set up an appointment with Jillian. Can I just run him over with my bike? Sage grumbled. I heard that. I fulfilled my duties, Miss Time. He turned and looked at me, a sullen expression on his face, and for a second, I thought I recognized something about this guy. Remove the black-rimmed glasses, take him out of the suit, and put him in. Nah, it was nothing. Chalk it up to creeping him on my office computer. I told you. He looked over at the trees, then back at me. I didn't want to see you again. He walked toward another parking lot. Have a prosperous and good life. I believe that is a polite way of saying screw off, my sister said. Why did you start researching Oscar Cooper? I called out. He unlocked the driver's door of a small vehicle. I couldn't see what kind. His tall frame disappeared. Sage and I heard a rattle, then a put, 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 and a blue-gray square vehicle lurched as it reversed out of a parking spot, with Mr. Younghusband hunched over the steering wheels. The gears ground and the Morris Minor stalled. Oh my God, he stalled it, Sage said. After a couple of attempts, the Morris Minor came to life and putted towards the university exit and onto the road. gears grinding. So that's kind of like a first meet. Okay.
So lots of potential. Loving that scene. You said you stumbled across that scene, Joanna. How do you say stumbled? Just the relationship that Sage is going to have, or the relationship, or the penguins? Did you even make up the penguins? Are they real? I think
They are real. And like I said, this whole relationship with Sage and Jillian, like I said, I started typing it, and I did. I stopped, and I thought, just go with your characters. See what's going to unfold with your characters. And what was nice for me is the sister, Sage. She's had a rough time of feeling accepted. And so it was nice to see her and Jillian come together. And it was just nice to see this character, like this is a character you invent. It was nice to see this character happy, right? So we're supposed to be nasty to our characters. So in book 3, like I said, spoiler, Jillian goes missing. And so that's what I like with whether it's relationships or romance, is that now we're dealing with a whole new ball of wax, right? So
yeah. I guess earlier on I argued that romance could lower tension, but I guess in a lot of ways, especially in crime, romance could up the tension. I guess it increases the stakes for everybody involved. So we're pretty much ran out of time, but I'll open to the floor. Any last comments?
Mhm.
For having me, Erik. It's just been a delight to see all you guys. Wonderful to hear you read your stories.
You too, Lyn.
Yes, thank you for hosting us, Erik, and it's been a lot of fun to see everyone.
You're welcome. It was a fun talk. It went in a few directions I wasn't planning on. For anyone watching this currently, Lyn and I are going to be doing an interview next week. We're going to start our first series going pro. So this is the first episode of this one. Soon, Crime Writers of Canada is going to start acknowledging our associate members who take the leap, publish their first novels, and become professional authors. So congratulations to Lyn for writing your first crime novel, although you've written many more, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more next week. But everyone here, thank you for being our guest today. We had some repeat guests, and I've had some new guests today, so it was an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
thank you, Erik.
Thank you.
It's really cool to be on a panel with all of you.
Sure, you're on the opposite side. You usually ask me the question.
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah.